We got a lot to talk about today. First of all, I'm so thrilled to be here. This is really exciting for me. I've covered the Razorbacks a couple times this year, as Bo mentioned, and it's a thrill to be face-to-face with the fans, because usually when we're calling games, you know, we're 70 yards removed from the action, and the only chance we get to see you guys is when you're in the stands or when we're looking into a television camera. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I do on a weekly basis. We'll talk some SEC football. If you're interested, I also sat in on the College Football Playoff mock selection committee a couple weeks ago. It was really interesting to see and hear how the selection committee goes about choosing the final four teams to play for a national championship. So we got a lot to talk about, and I'm more than happy to take questions towards the tail end, and we can just talk football or whatever you guys want to discuss. I did pull out a couple of stats I thought might be of interest from this past weekend. Did anybody see Ohio State go down? Yes. They got smoked by Purdue. I think they allowed 35 points in the fourth quarter. The final score was Purdue 49-20. It was the third. Oh, Purdue fan? We just hate Ohio State. That's fair. That's fair. It was the third largest win by an unranked team over an AP top 2 team. I'll give you the other two. In 1942, Holy Cross beat #1 Boston College by 43 points. Does anybody know what happened in 1981? Come on. Arkansas beat #1 Texas by 31 points. There you go, our local historian. I thought you guys might be interested in that. Well, I had 2 Arkansas games this year, and I know you guys want to talk about Arkansas, so we'll dip into that real quick. I had their game at Auburn, and then we had their home game in Little Rock, which was interesting. I think that the job that Chad Morris is doing is remarkable, because anytime you take over a program, and I said this on Bo's radio show today, not only do you have to change the culture of a program that only won 4 games the year before, but you also have to change the personnel. And what he wants to do offensively is drastically different than the way they were built for what Brett Bielema wanted to do. And I know a lot of you football folks know that, but if you're not familiar, just simply the body type on the offensive line is totally different. Where Brett Bielema wanted road graders at 360 pounds, he's going to want guys that can move a little bit so their offense can move up and down the field. So that changes your strength and conditioning, it changes your off-season weight program, and it really changes the type of player that you're going to recruit. So it takes time. And Bo asked me today how many wins he thought Arkansas might finish with. And my answer was, it's irrelevant. And I know that as fans, you want to go see a team win games. But what's really hard to understand is what's best for the team and the program long term, a lot of times in a turnaround, is more important than what's happening this week or next month. And as an example, you can point to Kentucky. Alyssa pointed out that Kentucky's, what, number 12 in the country right now? 13?
Yes.
Yeah. I kind of feeling you're just going to agree with what, yes. Kentucky's number 13 or 12 or whatever in the country. And if they win at Missouri, they're probably a top 10 team. When Mark Stoops took over that program, he won 2 games his first year, and he won 2 games his second year. Then he won 5 games in 5 games, and he built up to a point where he's got his own guys in there. He has an SEC-sized offensive line. He's got a junior college quarterback he likes. He's got an All-American running back, an All-American defensive end, an All-American left guard, and they are poised for a breakthrough season. If their administration would have pulled the plug on him after 3 years, they would have hit the reset button, and it would have been right back to 2 wins and 2 wins and 3 wins. But now, Kentucky football, right? We usually talk about Kentucky basketball, but Kentucky football is in a place where they could win the SEC East and go to Atlanta. So as fans, we want so badly for our team to win, and we want to win the water cooler on Monday for that guy from out of state who's going to talk junk. It's really important as fans and supporters to be patient and to understand that the long-term goal is most important. And a guy like Chad Morris has proven he can turn a program around. It takes time, but as an outsider, I see a guy who's on his way to doing that, and I think he will. Just a little bit about me and what I do. College football is just part of my calendar year. It keeps me plenty busy between August and all the way through Thanksgiving, and then a couple or 3 bowl games afterwards. I work with great partners during college football. Same with college basketball, where I call 2 or 3 games a week for ESPN and the SEC Network, and that rolls right into college baseball. And I've been lucky to be here numerous times at Baum Stadium to cover this baseball program. And by the way, Andrew Benintendi was brought up by Bo, and that's fantastic. He started last night 4 for 4. But did you know that of the 2 40-man rosters between the Red Sox and the Dodgers, there are 17 players in this College World Series that played at SEC schools? 17. That is more than the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10 combined. And at any given point, if you're watching the Red Sox, just for example, especially if David Price is on the mound, you could have an SEC guy in left field, center field, second base, and first base along with the mound. And so just remember that when you go out and you watch Arkansas baseball or you're paying attention to SEC sports, that is the elite of the elite. And so you should take great pride that Andrew Benintendi, with his beautiful hair that we're all jealous of, is representing this community on a national stage. This is my 2nd year with my current broadcast crew on the SEC Network. Jordan Rogers is our color analyst. Cole Kublik, who played center at Auburn, is our sideline analyst. I've had a great joy to work with a variety of guys since I got to ESPN. My first partner was Andre Ware. He won the Heisman in 1987, I think it was. The Heisman weighs like 50 pounds. It's a beautiful bronze statue. My second partner was Matt Stinchcomb. He was an offensive lineman at the University of Georgia. He won what was then called the Draddy Award. It's now called the Campbell Trophy. It is awarded to literally the smartest guy in college football. And he is one of the smartest individuals I've ever met. So I had those 2 national award winners, and then they tell me I'm working with Jordan Rogers. Does anybody know what Jordan won?
The Bachelorette.
He won the Bachelorette. And he's got the prettiest trophy of them all. So we're lucky to have a great crew. We're also the only crew. I played small college football at a Division III school. It hardly matters, except that I have this great curiosity about the game. And we are the only crew at ESPN where all 3 of us played college football. So that brings great pride to me that we're able to stand up every Saturday and talk about the game from a place of not only personal interest and experience, but for me it's a natural curiosity. I have not once asked Jordan a single question about the Bachelorette. I don't really care how he got the rose or what happened in episode 3, but I do talk to him a lot about college football. And I talked to him, for example, I asked him on the air the other night, I said, you had to play against Jadeveon Clowney, who was the most disruptive player in college football when he was at South Carolina. How in the world, as a quarterback, do you go to the line, you look over and you see him with snot bubbles coming out of his face, knowing that he wants to kill you, and you stay in the game? And he said, it was really easy. I just told all 5 offensive linemen, go block that dude, and I'll take my chances with the rest of them. And the same thing with Cole, because he played in the SEC. He played in the Iron Bowl. He's got a passion for preparation and film study, and that pays off, I think, in our broadcast. So it turns into a lot of fun when you work with people that you like and you enjoy and that you trust. We travel every week with almost 40 different support personnel. Those work in 3 separate trucks on game day. We have our main production truck. We have a secondary truck that handles all of the graphics, and then a 3rd truck that simply handles the tape room and the replays and all the fancy edits that you see. That's a big number. 40 is a big number relative to most broadcast crew sizes, but we have a lot of responsibilities that we have to get in the game from a sales standpoint and from a promotional standpoint. So we're trusted with that. And we're trusted taking over a time slot in the SEC Network that was previously held by Brent Musburger and Jesse Palmer and Kaylee Hartog, and they were all fantastic. So there was a little bit of pressure on us when we took over. Brent is a Hall of Famer. He'd been in the business for 40 years. He'd called everything. He left ESPN, and he now runs a Vegas Sports and Insiders network. He loves gambling. They had me at 3-to-1 odds to replace him. So somehow I pulled off the upset. But he's been a great support to me and working with us and getting us up to speed with this package. We're lucky that we work with the best conference in college football. We get great support from Birmingham, and we work with the best network in all of sports in ESPN. A little bit more about what we do to prepare for a game. So we've got 40 people that travel with us. They all show up probably Thursday night, first thing Friday morning. That's when their work begins. Our work as announcers usually starts Sunday morning on our flight home from our previous game, where literally when I left Little Rock a week and a half ago, I got on a 6 a.m. flight, and I had Cole Kublik, whose playing weight was probably 260 pounds, tap me on the shoulder and say, "I think we should sit next together on the flight." I said, "Cole, I have a seat in coach, and I'm not sitting middle." He said, "No, that's fine. I'll sit next to you." So he sits next to me, and he breaks out his iPad, and literally before the sun is up, he has Auburn film out, and he is watching film on that flight home to prepare for his week so he can be educated on all the teams in college football, starting with Auburn. So then he can prepare for our game. So we'll have a conference call Monday. We'll share with our producer the thoughts that we have and what we need to literally, it's not literal anymore because it's not tape, but to cull highlights, to pull plays that we think might be relevant for the game that coming Saturday. We'll have conference calls with coaches on Wednesday for the visiting team. We'll go in for practice on Thursday. We'll spend some time with a couple players. Friday morning we'll get up, go back to the facility for film room, and we'll watch film, just the 5 of us, the 3 announcers, our producer and director. And we'll watch film for an hour, and we'll talk about what we see and what might impact the game. And then we go straight into coaches' meetings, which is the most valuable time of our week, where we will sit down with the head coach, his 2 coordinators, and maybe a couple more players, and we'll ask them direct questions about what we should expect for the game and how we can use that information to prepare. And sometimes we give them information. Sometimes we share with them what we saw, and ask those questions. So we're not just spitballing when we get on air on Saturday. More production meetings, more meetings, blah, blah, blah. And then we're at the game about 3 hours before kickoff, and we do the same thing all over again the next week. And if you're, just 101 real quick, as the play-by-play announcer, my job is simply to tell people what's happening on the field. To give the down and distance, to say who the player is that carried the football, to say who scored, to sprinkle in some stats to give it some depth. And then Jordan's job and Cole's job is to answer the why. Why is Arkansas playing this person at quarterback? Why is Auburn defending them this way? What is the long-term answer for this program? And those guys played the game. That's what they get paid to do. I know that sounds really simple, but you're doing that over 3.5 hours with the producer in your ear and sponsor reads and ads, and it's kind of madness, but it's a fun kind of madness. I got to ESPN by way of a couple different stops. I was at the Big Ten Network before that. I was at CBS College Sports prior to that, and I spent 9 years calling minor league baseball on the radio, which was both thrilling and depressing at the same time. What I learned was you could say anything that you wanted. And if the boss didn't call, it meant that he didn't hear it, which meant nobody was listening. So that was the depressing part. The positive was it was an opportunity to get better each and every time out, to get reps just like a shortstop would, to take ground balls and to improve at your craft. So that thrill of improving each and every day and then trying to reach your final goal is what keeps me motivated. And when we do that every week in the SEC, that's what keeps us motivated as a team to have the best broadcast possible. I'm going to open up for questions in just a minute, but I also wanted to touch on this. So each year, the College Football Playoff Committee they host 3 different groups to come in to learn about what they do, which is still brand new for college football fans in terms of picking the Final 4 teams. They'll host a group of bowl executives, they'll host a group of writers, and they'll host a group of broadcasters. And their goal is to be as transparent as possible with us, so then when we come to the Touchdown Club or we go on the air, we can explain how they work and what they do. And I won't bore you with all the details. It is a much more involved process than I originally thought in terms of parliamentary procedure to bring up a team, to discuss a team, to vote 4 teams at a time and cull it from a list of 30 all the way down to 4. And it didn't really seem like football. It felt like a city council meeting. But that's what they do to make sure they got all their I's dotted and T's crossed. So it is fascinating in that respect. My main takeaway from that is this. A lot of folks want to ask if a group of 5 team, that's a team outside the major conferences, would make the playoff and what they would have to do. UCF was undefeated last year. They claim that they won a national championship, which, by the way, I claim I won Mega Millions last night. I don't have a check, so I don't know how that works, so you can just pretend. But that's what UCF's doing. They're undefeated still. They haven't lost in a year and a half. But in my experience, just as a mock committee member, I don't see any possible way that a group of 5 team will ever get in the college football playoff. They're at a complete disadvantage that they don't play a schedule that matches up with the same schedule that a Big Ten team or an SEC team plays week in and week out. So, if you're a UCF fan, sorry. And you should invite us all to Orlando because they don't have clouds. It's always sunny there. We could go to Disney. That's all I got in terms of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. But if there are any other questions about it, I would be more than happy to answer those questions as we go on. I am sure there's some questions about Arkansas football or the SEC, and I'm more than happy to answer those. The counter to that is Danny Sheridan left all of his jokes on this podium, and I could read through most of those unless anybody disagrees. I feel like I've been talking nonstop. Does anybody have any questions for me about what we do or how we present a college football game or Arkansas football? Yes, sir.
How far in advance do you know where you're going to call the game? I mean, do you know the whole season?
No, I know about 5 hours before the fans find out. So we know 6 days out. Sometimes we'll know 10 days out. But usually we have to wait for everybody else's picks to come through. And if you're not familiar with the CBS, with the contracts, CBS gets the first pick. That's what goes to the 3:30 game. Next week they have the first pick that goes to the 7:30 game, and then everything else just follows through after that. So they pay good money for it, and the schools, everybody likes to complain about, nobody likes 11 a.m. kicks, right? Well, those 11 a.m. kicks and all of those answers to the TV questions come down to one big number, and that's $41 million, $41 million, sorry. That's a check that each school gets for their television rights, which pays a lot of bills. And that's kind of how they have to be slotted to get them all in a given Saturday. Next.
What are your thoughts on playing games in Little Rock?
How did I know that was going to come up? Let me take the temperature of the room. How many folks in here want to see a game played in Little Rock every other year? All right. I'm with like-minded people. That's what I thought. I have a couple views on it. Number one, take the money out of it. And I know that's hard to do because everyone here has an investment in this community. So you want to see 70,000 people here on a given Saturday, which I totally understand. And that is certainly part of the argument. But to me, if you're an Arkansas football fan and you think you're doing the program a favor by playing a game in your backyard in Little Rock, I think you're mistaken. Because every other year when you do that, you leave the program with a grand total of 2 SEC home games. And home games are vital to hosting recruits on campus. And recruiting is vital to winning. And winning on National Signing Day gives you a leg up on all of your competition, especially in this conference. So to me, it retards the growth of the program as a whole when you give a home game away. Forget about how far away the town is and forget about that local support. Anytime you give a home game away and you can't officially host recruits, you're missing an opportunity to grow your program. That's how I view it as an outsider. And we didn't even touch the politics part of it.
Unless we got top recruits in Little Rock.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
When you're doing your show prep, what's a off the wall stat that you're looking for? Like I know in basketball there's weird things rebounds plus points plus this. There's something that you see when you're doing your
Yeah.
for team upcoming. It's like, oh, if that team does this, I know that they're a really good offense, a really good defense.
I don't know that there's necessarily a stat. In basketball, there's a few I'd look for. Offensive and defensive efficiency are big with me. Sweat quotient. Why is it so hot in here? It was that politics question that got me, sorry. What I do more so is I like to look at personal stories. There's a kid on this team, I should have remembered it, but there's a kid on this team from Smackover, Arkansas. Jordan Jones. So do you guys know, and this is, Mr. History might know this, but the famous player from Smackover, Arkansas in Razorback history?
Clyde Scott.
Wait.
Clyde Scott.
Clyde Scott. So when I saw the town Smackover, Arkansas, I thought, well, there's got to be something interesting about this. And that's how my mind works when it comes to prep. So next thing you know, I'm in a 30-minute Wikipedia wormhole learning all about this guy who was an Olympic medalist and who, by the way, unless I'm mistaken, he was one of the reasons the games started to be played. He's one of the reasons Arkansas plays in Little Rock. Because when he was here and the gate receipts got to a point where it was more valuable to play games in Memphis and Tulsa so folks could come see him, that's when they realized we need to build a stadium in the state so we're not moving these games elsewhere. So that was a long-winded answer to say football stats-wise, there aren't a whole lot I go for. I leave that to my analysts, but from a prep standpoint, I'm a sucker for stories like that and for history of a program. Because I think if I bring that up in game, that might jog someone's memory and they say, yeah, I was here for that, or I remember reading about that guy, or that's unique that somebody who lives in Atlanta, Georgia cared enough to learn about the history of our program.
So as a sucker for history, like you said, as a play-by-play guy versus a color guy, you're like during your broadcast, are you tempted to go into like the color side? How do you get back to what your specific task is at hand during the broadcast as a play-by-play guy?
In football, that temptation is not really there just because of the speed of the game. Sometimes we'll get into those discussions in baseball where I'll share my thoughts. And when I do that, when I say we all three played, I played at a small D3 school that nobody's ever heard of, so it hardly counts, except that I'm very curious about what it's like to play at this level and what those guys are thinking during the game. So as an example, I might make an observation that would be at the elementary level, let's say the 100 level, that anybody on their couch would make that same assumption. So if you played a high school football, you might say, oh, I was cover 3, so obviously they're going to attack it this way. And I might tee that up for Jordan to talk about and say, he might go, well, if that's all you're looking at, that's how you would attack it. But what I see is X, Y, and Z. So I want them to give more depth to what we're seeing. Because I think that no matter who you are, there's always something to learn about during a game. And I think that's impressive. Like Coach Travis right now is trying to figure out how to stop Connor Flanagan. Got no idea. Connor Flanagan had, 212 yards receiving the other day? But if he hears Jordan Rodgers talking about, if Connor hears Jordan Rodgers talking about a certain route combination, I think that's something that high school coaches and players can learn from a guy who played in the SEC.
Prediction for this weekend. Racetrack.
Make me sweat more. It's really hot. Okay, let's take the call. All right, here's the deal. Vanderbilt is really good. They are really good. They have not won a conference game. Wow. This is full service. Forecast said it was going to be chilly. You had gravy on this. I love gravy. Vanderbilt's a really good team. They almost won at Notre Dame. It came down to a drop pass. They probably should have won at Notre Dame, and then we wouldn't be talking about Notre Dame as a college football playoff team. They almost won at Kentucky. They lost by a touchdown. They should have beaten Florida at home. So they are very good, but they're also very beatable. And one of the reasons I think the Kentucky game was so close is because Kentucky did not have a passing game to take advantage of it. So I think if Arkansas's receivers get an opportunity to run and they get an opportunity to throw the ball, then they can score a lot of points against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's strength defensively is in their linebackers. They have a guy that's got 36 tackles the last 2 games. They love to stop the run. They're not really great against the pass. And they have a good quarterback who's been there, and he's a senior, but he's not a great quarterback, and he makes a lot of mistakes. So, trying to do the math here. Do you think 24-20 Arkansas would be a fair result?
Fair.
I think that's doable.
It's fair.
Yeah. Okay, 24-20.
Okay, we'll take that.
Take it to Vegas.
Yep. Call Danny.
Do you have any thoughts on what Kelly Bryant's going to do, and if he came to Arkansas, should we be excited about it?
Oh, you should be really excited. Really excited. And I think you should be excited. I don't usually get into recruiting. This is a little bit different because a guy left in the middle of the season. To me, you're not a valuable recruit until you've shown up on campus and you've shown what you can do. He's obviously done that. I think he's a perfect fit. We talked about Chad bringing his own type of players in. I think he's the perfect fit for what Chad wants to do because that's exactly what they're doing at Clemson. It is unique, though, that we have free agency in college football now. And I am 100% for it, especially if you've graduated. I think these kids put so much work into what they do on the field and what they do to get their academics in order. To graduate at a point, to graduate in 5 years, let alone 4 or 3.5, as some of these guys do, is absolutely amazing, given all the responsibilities that they have on their time outside of school. So I think they should be allowed to do that. I'm glad that Kelly is in a position where he is putting himself and his values at the forefront, because let's be honest, a lot of these programs think of program first and program only. But I think it would be a great fit. He is, last I heard, and you guys might know more about this than I do, visiting here, visiting Missouri, and I think there was an ACC school, maybe North Carolina. Oh, Louisville?
And North Carolina.
He went to North Carolina.
What do you guys think about the Louisville coach?
He likes bikes.
He likes bikes, huh? Interesting. I hadn't heard that story. So yeah, I think it would be a great get for whoever ends up with him, because you're going to end up with an experienced quarterback who has played in and won really big games, and that is a big boost to the locker room. Yes, sir.
Where'd you play college football and what position?
I played at Quincy University. At the time, they were a Division III school, transferring to Division II. Depending on who you ask, I was either a skinny tight end or a slow wide receiver. I didn't stick around that long. I ended up transferring back to Missouri and getting my real life started, as opposed to playing small school college football.
What's the Clark story?
Oh, this is something you'd have to look up at YouTube, or I'll send it to Bo and he can play it on the air. This is kind of how, it's a great story of how I treat my partners during a particular game day. We were here for a late season Arkansas baseball game. I was calling the game with Kyle Peterson and Eduardo Perez. And we do our opens live, meaning, and there's some broadcasts where they will tape the first 3 minutes of the show while they're on camera, and they'll just roll it in, and if you mess up, you can do 2, 3, 4 takes, whatever you need to do. We just do ours live. We find that the pressure of live makes you perform a little bit better, except in this instance where my partner Kyle Peterson was trying to say that Arkansas was fighting for a division crown. Instead, he said they were farting for a division crown. And as soon as he came out of his mouth, he tried to fix it. And on camera, I just kind of looked over at him and I said, well, it would be noteworthy either way, now wouldn't it? He starts laughing. The guy in the middle starts laughing. And at that time, who was Arkansas playing that weekend? Whoever they were playing, their star player was out with an injury. And so I transitioned. I said, a really smelly situation for the opposition here, Eduardo. They've got to do without their key player. And it just deteriorated from there. It's on the interwebs. It will always be there. And I wasn't the one that used that word. It was my partner. Thank goodness. Alyssa Orange.
So you talked about UCF just never going to get into the College World Series. Do you think an expansion solves that problem, or are they just absent?
As far as the College Football Playoff Committee is concerned, they're never going to expand until they do. the BCS was never going to end until it did. And typically the reasons those things change is the dollar signs. People understand that there's more money to be made. Or if you upset one of the power brokers, then that also brings about change. For example, this year, if the SEC gets 2 in, which is entirely possible, let's say LSU beats Alabama, Alabama has 1 loss, LSU wins the SEC, and Alabama's standing there at the end of the year with a close loss to LSU and no other blemishes on their schedule, you can bet that Alabama's going to get in. And LSU would be in as the SEC champion. So right now, currently, we have, outside of that, we have 5 major conferences and 4 spots in the playoff. So one conference is getting left out every year. So take, for example, last year, or what could happen this year, you get 2 SEC teams in. That means you've got 2 conferences left out, only 3 represented. Well, I don't know if you guys noticed, but Notre Dame is undefeated. And while Notre Dame's resume may not stack up with everybody else's, they bring television eyeballs. This is a television show. If Notre Dame is undefeated, even without a conference championship, they're going to be in. That leaves you down to 2 conferences that would be represented and 3 power conferences that would be left out. And at that point, the folks who make the decisions are going to be very upset, whether it's the Pac-12, the Big Ten, the ACC, whomever. They're going to try and make changes. I believe that the best route to go is to an 18 playoff where you can give the 5 Power 5 conference champions a berth. You can set aside a spot for the group of 5 champion, or whoever that might be, the best one, and then you'd have 2 wild cards. So every game still matters. Because if you're going to get 2 in from one conference occasionally, as we saw from the SEC last year, then every game will still matter and everybody will be still fighting for a wild card spot, and every game matters in terms of winning the conference. That would be my solution. They're not going to listen to me. It's only going to change when the power brokers decide for it to be changed. And no matter what you hear about contracts being signed through, I think, 2025, contracts can be changed, especially when there's more money to be made. That's how I view it. Yes, sir.
Let's stay on Notre Dame. Set aside the money, the politics, all that. Talk about their schedule. So, and I'm just going to be quite honest. So to me, traveling across the country every week is pretty difficult. Take us through the argument that they play a week schedule when they have to travel from USC to
Yeah, they also have 5 ACC games mixed in now against ACC opponents. To me, it's more about the strength of schedule for the opposition. They're hurt by the fact that their rivalry games on the West Coast, USC and Stanford, they're having down years. So they lose in the formula that shows you strength of schedule. They lose any sort of buildup that they have gotten from those games in the past. The ACC's having a down year. So those middle-of-the-pack ACC teams in years past may give you a bump. They get no credit for going on the road and blowing out Wake Forest. That means next to nothing. So in the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, when the College Football Playoff Selection Committee sits down, not only are they comparing the raw number of strength of schedule, but they're also going line by line. And they're saying, Team 4 played this strength of schedule, and in week 3 they played these guys, and week 4 they beat these guys. And that's the comp, a direct comp to Notre Dame. And the way they do it, or would be in that scenario, and the way they do it is pretty simple. They compare 4 teams at a time, 3 or 4, but mostly they compare 4 teams at a time. So you'll go from 30 and you pick your first 4, and then you'll pick your next 4 and on down the line, and you can keep going back and forth. But it's not Notre Dame versus the other 29 teams you're considering. It's Notre Dame versus those other 3, and how do they compare from there? But I do think that there is, in their mind, because this is not a computer system, it is not all numbers, it's not an algorithm, there's humans in there picking the teams. And so I think they are tempted to lean towards an Ohio State, a Notre Dame, an Alabama. And we've seen the results of that over the first few years of it, I think. Yes, ma'am.
If you go to an 18 playoff, then do you eliminate conference championship games?
That's a great question. It depends on what the conferences want to do. And right now, the conferences that make the decisions make a lot of money from those games. They make a lot of money through ticket sales and sponsorship deals. They also make a lot of money from their television partners who pay big money to host those games. I don't think you do. I think you could find a way to keep the conference championship game. In many ways, like if you're the SEC, for example, that might be the key to getting a second wild card team in, is if you keep the conference championship game. So every conference is going to act in its best interest to get as many teams in as possible. I'd play a conference championship game, I'd give you 2 weeks off, then you play the first round on campus, which gives those top 4 teams great incentive to finish in the top 4 as opposed to the bottom 4. And I think fans would appreciate that. I mean, we were talking about playing a game in Little Rock every year. You also play a game in Jerry World every year. How great would it be? Because you guys understand the value of a home game. You like to go to games. So how great would it be to have a game the second week in December when typically everybody's out Christmas shopping, where you're playing a game in town that matters and that everyone in the country is going to be watching? I think that would be a great boost for college football.
So you end up adding a game.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, at the Division I AA level, they play, a lot of teams play 14 games, 15 games because of their playoff structure. Same thing in Division II, same thing in Division III, which is interesting. That's been used as a reason or an excuse by the power brokers. Well, we don't want to add a game. We don't want to put too much on their plate. That hasn't been an issue for the lower levels. So we're kind of picking and choosing our arguments, I think, because those are all NCAA sanctioned events at the Division II and Division III level, the FCS level. And all the rules that are made in college football, from recruiting to targeting, those are made by rules committees that are made up of every level being represented, including Division III coaches. So it's all one big happy family when they want it to be. If it doesn't suit their agenda, then they change it, which is par for the course.
What's your take on like bowl games? Like, you're not in the playoff bowl, but like the
Yeah.
other bowl games where like you have a star player and he doesn't play because it's the toilet bowl. But
Would you watch the toilet bowl on television?
Yes, he would.
I mean, I would too. That's a great question, especially in light of Bosa at Ohio State leaving due to an injury. I want to start with this on bowl games, and it kind of dovetails with what we're talking about expanding a playoff. As people say, well, how could you dare expand the playoff? It's just going to take away from the bowl games. Bowl games are television programs. They're television programs and they're fundraising events for local economies. That's really all they are. They are exhibitions at their core. And if you guys are like me, I don't really care who's playing. I don't care what else is on. I'm going to watch a college football game. If that's Christmas afternoon, if that is December 13th and a game being played in Albuquerque, if it's on, I'm going to watch it. So first and foremost, that's the deal. So if you think about it from that perspective, that those bowl games outside of the playoffs are exhibitions, then how could you hold it against a kid who wants to protect himself and his future by sitting one out? I don't know how you can. I think that the NFL teams have already made it clear that they value what you do in Indianapolis at the Combine. They value what you do from a measurable standpoint, even a lot of times more so than they value film. So I don't think it hurts the kid. The other aspect of it is if you have a star running back that sits out a bowl game and he doesn't play in the toilet bowl versus Tech, is that going to mean fewer people watch? Probably not. But that also might be an opportunity for the other running back who hasn't gotten a chance. And so there's 85 guys on scholarship. There should be plenty to go around.
Being a Missouri guy, what do you think of the kind of budding rivalry, so to speak, between Arkansas and Missouri?
I love it. I love it. I appreciate the fact from where I sit, there's not much animosity, but I remember going to those basketball games in the mid-'90s. There was some animosity there. Yeah, I mean, it got raw and real with Norm Stewart on one side and Nolan on the other, and that's what a rivalry is supposed to be. You guys will remember when the new arena opened, Missouri was the opponent. I think there was a soft opening, and then there was the ribbon cutting, or was that the very first game? Okay. Well, Missouri got blown out by like 30, if I'm not mistaken. That was the championship year, right? Arkansas goes on to win a national championship. Missouri went undefeated in their conference. So after that day, they both, well, Arkansas had a great day that day, but even after that day, Missouri had a great season. What folks don't know, and I didn't realize this until recently, is that Missouri team ended up being a top 10 team. They didn't get out of Columbia, Missouri in time because their charter flights, Norm Stewart liked to fly in day of game. He didn't want to spend any money in any other state besides Missouri. So they would fly in day up. Well, there were so many dignitaries flying into the airport that Missouri's charter flights, 3 of them, had to circle. First of all, they're delayed from leaving, and then they had to circle and circle and circle. And they finally landed, and they were so late that they dressed in the bus, they came straight to the arena, and they came in piece by piece. Here's the first flight, here's the first bus. And guys were running down through the tunnel trying to get dressed to go out on the floor, and they showed up like an hour before tip-off, which is no excuse. That was a great Arkansas team. Missouri needs rivalries. They no longer have Kansas. That was one that dated, obviously, to the Civil War. Arkansas needs rivalries. The game of college sports is based on playing your neighbors. It's based on having historical rivals, whether that's Texas or Kansas or whoever it is. And with the growth of super conferences, we've gotten away from that. And what it hurts most is, even if you're not a rival, it hurts familiarity, because you have schools that now you see once every 6 to 8 years and you have no history with them. So sometimes it's hard to build. At least Missouri and Arkansas have that background that it can be built upon.
With what Alabama's done so far this year, where only one great team has been able to score 31 points on them. Do you think anybody can touch them, and do you think they may possibly have one of the greatest college teams of all time?
I think it's one of the greatest college teams of all time. But I also know that they are 18 to 23 years old, and that any given day, anybody can lose. I said this about Tua Tagovailoa before the season started. Bo and I talked about this today, that I thought he was getting ready to embark on what would be a Hall of Fame career, and that Alabama was in position to have one of the best teams we've ever seen. And they've proven it so far. And so here's just a quick note that I discovered about Alabama. They have scored on every opening drive this season. That's 8 games they've played. All 8 games, they've scored a touchdown in the opening drive. If I remember correctly, in the Arkansas game, it was 3 plays. Does that sound right? Oh, it was 1? No. Well, that helps the average. Alabama averages 4.5 plays on their opening drive. So think about that. If they're covering 75 yards most times, they're doing it in 4.5 plays. In the last 15 years of college football, there's only been one other team that scored on its opening drive each of their first 8 games. That was a Baylor team in 2015, and they're a high-octane offense, and they threw it a lot. So that's understandable. The last 13 years, the national champion has never accomplished that. So it tells you that not only are they superior athletically, we know they have a great quarterback, we know they have great weapons, but that their coaching staff, which is the best that money can buy, and they got a lot of money there, it's also the largest that money can buy, that their coaching staff does such a good job that their game plan is worked to perfection during the week, so that when they show up on Saturday, they are unstoppable based on what they expect you to do and what they know they can do. And to me, when you talk about coaching staffs, that goes to budgets, and that's the biggest separator in college football, in my opinion. It's not just local talent and in-state talent and who you recruit, but it's how much money these programs can spend on monster staffs outside of just coaches, but graduate assistants and special advisors and guys that spend all of their time in the film room, while the other coaches, the full-time guys, can go out and recruit. And that's a huge advantage for the few programs that really take advantage of it, which are the Alabamas, the Clemsons, and the LSUs of the world, Oklahoma, Texas, also in that conversation. So staffs are growing, but it's a long way to go to catch up. I know you guys have to get back to work.
Last one.
Arkansas versus Arkansas State, is that something that should happen or continue to not happen?
It depends on your point of view, I suppose. If you're, I've always been a fan of the underdog. That's why I would love to see the college football playoff grow, and I would love to see a UCF, based on what they've done on the field, get a chance to play. That being said, there's only so many games in the college football season, and we know the value of a non-conference schedule. I don't know what's in it for Arkansas. And so if I were the underdog, I'd be banging on the door every day and say, let us play, let us play. If I was the other guy, I'd never answer the door. Because you have absolutely zero to gain. You're opening up the door to them being allowed to grow their fan base at your expense, number one. And if you beat them, you're expected to. And if you lose to them, then that opens a whole nother can of worms that you don't want to have to deal with. So that applies. This is not the only state where that's an issue. That applies across the board in college football. Guys, thank you so much for having me. This was a joy. Thank you, and we'll see you on TV Saturday.